Welcome, everybody, to today's live stream on Palestine Bookshelf. We're going to be talking about the very new documentary called The Settlers by Louis Theroux. Now, this might be confusing because there is another documentary we've already covered for a film club on this channel called The Settlers, which was done by Shimon Dotan in 2016, and which also features what a friend of mine calls the genocide grandma, Daniela Weiss. This woman, anytime there's a documentary about settlers, she's going to be present. What I find remarkable is that this documentary got made. It's a BBC documentary in an era in which the BBC lies about Israel, lies about Gaza. I can't believe the documentary got made. I can't believe the documentary got broadcast. That's the thing, is sometimes documentaries can get made and not broadcast. This was infamously done with a documentary by Al Jazeera called The Lobby, and Israel managed to stop it from getting broadcast. On Al Jazeera, Israel was able to make sure that an Al Jazeera documentary never saw the light of day. It was leaked eventually, and you can find it now on YouTube and other places. But I would not be surprised if in a few weeks we find that this documentary is not available online, or you can only find it on places like Odyssey. For those of you who are coming to the stream, consider hitting the like button now. It's a way to alert all the subscribers to the channel that a live stream is going on, and it's a free way that you can support the stream. So I'm surprised that the documentary came out. I'm very happy for it. It's only an hour, so it's very easy to watch. If you didn't have a chance to watch it before today's stream, you can easily watch it after the stream. It's not long. And it recapitulates in a broader way something that we've already seen in these other settler documentaries. These people are convinced of the rightness of their cause. And it doesn't matter. You can't say, well, what does the rest of the world think, or international law? None of that matters to them. What matters is that God promised them the land. They think that by calling it Judea, 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 that's a magical shibboleth, that by saying that makes it theirs. And it's a interesting and fundamental question about land and ownership and what that relates to. If they are to make their case is God gave us the land, and therefore that's why we're entitled to it. The problem is, even if they are to make that case, they are to make that argument, it fails, because God promised that land to Jews who would be faithful to his covenant. But the Jews broke the covenant with God by crucifying the Messiahs. So the Jewish religion ended with the resurrection of Christ. There is another religion that has come up since then that uses the name of Judaism, that takes on the mantle of Judaism, but it's a fundamentally different religion. It doesn't have the sacrifice of the Old Testament Judaism. It doesn't have, and it creates this horrible document, the Talmud, which most people have never read, which is a hateful, ethno-religious document, which should be better known by people, but is it? That document, the Talmud, and this new version of Judaism, it's a post-Christian form of Judaism. It bears very little resemblance other than the name to old Judaism. That's what they're cloaking themselves in. But that's what I mean. Even by their own standards, that God gave us this land, that argument fails. So let's put that to the side and realize they don't care about international law. They don't care about what people are saying. They don't care when Theroux, I think, is a British Jew. He's coming and asking these questions, and she doesn't care. Genocide grandma Daniela Weiss, she says, we do what governments cannot do. Meaning the same policy that we've seen back to 1967. The government of Israel is subject somewhat to international law, I mean, not really, but they can't approve settlement construction because it's illegal under international law. But they can say, well, we can't stop these fervent religious zealots. But privately, they're very excited. Thank you, Daniela. Keep working. Here's some secret money. Here's some secret support. Here's the army. Here's some water. Here's some electricity. Daniela Weiss's family is from Warsaw. She's Polish. But this idea of Judaism, there's a larger connection too about this ethnicity of Judaism, which is tenuous also. We haven't had a chance to talk about Shlomo Sand's book, The Invention of the Jewish People, but it is very likely that people like Daniela Weiss are descendants of the Tatars, the people who converted to Judaism who were not ethnically Jewish and then continued to move into Europe. So the idea that she's ethnically Jewish, no, but she might be religiously Jewish as in related to this, but all of these tenuous connections are part of the settler project. You have to admire their militancy and their willingness to stand in the face of world disapproval and hold on to their crazy beliefs that this is what God intends and we are carrying it out. Um, with Daniela Weiss's Cruella, for people who may not recognize the reference Cruella de Vil from the Disney film 101 Dalmatians. Am I correct? I don't know my Disney films very well. Here are some quotes from a rabbi. Remember, the Jews are the ones who are seeking peace and the Palestinians are the ones who want war. There is no peace with these savages. This was said by a Jewish rabbi on the Gaza border. All of Lebanon must be cleansed of these camel riders. And this is where I want to push people. What's the distinction between Judaism and Zionism? People always want to make this distinction. Oh, we have no problem with Jews. It's all about Zionists. And as we see this convergence and the definition, the 2016 working definition of what anti-Semitism is, that criticism of Zionism is criticism of Judaism, that you will soon be priced out of your own argument. You're working so hard to make a distinction between the two that as you continue to make that argument that it's Zionist, you will still get lumped in as anti-Semites. In the category of every accusation is a confession, I think one of these settlers from Texas, towards the end of the documentary, he uses the phrase, he says, these people around us, and keep in mind the mental distortion field necessary to say this about the Palestinians who are living in an open air prison. He says that they have a genocidal theological bloodlust. Now, I'm not trying to paper over the fact that there are hostilities between Judaism and Islam. Let's be clear that there is. However, what is going on now is not a theological conflict. It is a political conflict about land. And that's at the base of everything. There are these other accoutrements that cannot be ignored when we're talking about the conflict. But to say that the Palestinians they're the ones who have a genocidal theological bloodlust, every accusation is a confession. We know that it is the Israelis who have a genocidal theological bloodlust. Throughout the documentary, they're saying this is land for Jews. This is land for Jews. We want all of them gone. And the argument, Louis pushes back, I think, on the Texan guy. He says, do these people not have a claim to this land? First of all, he tries to deny that they exist, right? There's no such thing as Palestinians. So that's a denial. But no, Louis doesn't push back, but I would if you're in this situation and someone says there's no such thing as Palestinians. Okay, let's pretend that we'll use the term you want to use, right? They say, let's call them Arabs. Fine, let's call them Arabs. And so does that mean that because they're Arabs, they have no property rights, they have no water rights, they have no rights to electricity, they have no rights to education, they have no rights as human beings? That's what that means to be Arab? Because they'll say, well, no, they're Arabs, they can just live anywhere. That's like saying, well, you're European, you can just live in any country. If you're Polish, you can just live in France because you're European. The silliness of the argument folds the minute that you push back. Say, oh, well, they're Arabs, they can live in any Arab country. That's like telling a Polish person that they can live in Portugal because they're Europeans. That argument doesn't hold. You can't just evict somebody because they're part of a larger ethnicity, in this case, Arabs. So he argues we have a deeper connection with the land. If that's so, why did you leave? Jews left. They even left in the time of Christ. If you look at the story of Pentecost, there were Jews from many different lands. So Jews were not even all living in Israel at the time of Christ. They were already dispersed. Jews like living in other places. They have for centuries. Even to this day, most, I think, either half of or most of Jews live outside of the state of Israel. They choose to do that despite all of the money and bribes that Israel will give to world Jewry to get them to come to relocate, to be part of their genocidal project. Almond Lord says, bro, you do not argue with Zionists. You should just let them talk. They will always end up exposing their own. I think that's a great point, Almond. And that's actually driven home by the documentary. The documentary, Louis really does very minimal talking. He allows actions to show. He shows intimidation by the army. He shows intimidation by local police forces. He shows how the Palestinians are treated, and he just lets them speak for themselves. I think your point's well taken, and that's why we see Daniela Weiss crop up over and over in the documentary. She does a wonderful job of speaking for the settlers. She is in fact in many ways the proto settler, at least public relations wise. There were other people, particularly the people in Hebron, that should bear some responsibility for being proto settlers. Maximums, they all seem to have a central place where they get the same talking points. They organized, which make them look larger than they are. Yeah, they have a central. I've done a review recently. I picked up a new one, looking for it now. But you're right, they do all have their talking points, and one that I'll review soon. This is called the Hasbara Handbook, Promoting Israel on Campus. So once you understand their talking points, well, I think you understand their talking points through doing research on Palestine anyway, but this is helpful to understand where they are coming from, what they're going to say. Colette waves. Hello, Colette. If you're in the stream now, please consider hitting the like button. As I said before, that activates the YouTube algorithm to notify people who are subscribers that a live stream is going on. Shameless plug for my live stream that's coming up in about half an hour over on the Stephen Heiner channel. If you're interested, we're going to be discussing The Earth is Weeping, the epic story of the Indian Wars for the American West. Interesting story about how this came together. YouTube, there's many ways I'm grateful to YouTube, but one of them is by videos that were suggested and people that I've had a chance to meet along the way. Dustin, the person who I'm doing this collaboration live stream with, was introduced to me while I was doing my work on Dune on my main channel. And then I saw some of his other work and I really liked it. And then he posted this on his community tab that he was reading this book. And it was on my bookshelf. And I said, hey, why don't we just read this together and do a stream? And so we're going to be doing probably a pretty lengthy stream. If you're interested in the story about the American Indians in the United States, how they were treated, what the wars were like, we'll be talking about that. So that should probably be a pretty lengthy stream that's coming on in about half an hour on the Stephen Heiner channel, if you are interested. Shameless plug done. Let's come back to Palestine Bookshelf. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about Louis Theroux's The Settlers, in which he goes around and talks to different people. It's a very short documentary. As I say, it's only an hour, which makes it inexcusable to miss. It's being talked about all over on social media. That's why I had a chance to cover it. I think a lot of times we're covering documentaries from 2002, 2006, 2008, whenever it is. This is the first time I've covered a documentary within a month of its release. So I think it was released in the last 30 days in 2025, when this is being recorded in May of 2025. And I've had a chance to watch it and record a reflection on it. So it's up to date info. And we end the documentary with them plotting out new settlements in Gaza. That's what their plan is. As we're watching people get murdered, they're planning houses, they're planning schools, synagogues, business districts. Doesn't matter to them that these people are dying. These aren't really people. They aren't Palestinians. They are not anyone. Remember, we have a deeper connection to this land. We do what governments cannot do. We have been given this land by God. Everyone else has to clear out. And I think importantly, one of the rabbis alludes to Greater Israel by saying all of Lebanon has to be cleared out as well. The reason there are no fixed borders of Israel is because the expansionist project always wants more land. They are land grabbers from the start. They have been from the very beginning of the Zionist project in Palestine, and that is through to the present day. It will not end. There is not enough land to satisfy Zionist demands. The whole earth would not be enough to satisfy Zionist demands. Maximus, there is real consequences to letting Israel act with total impunity. Now India thinks they can make Pakistan Gaza, so it is dangerous letting the Zionists get away with the genocide. Maximums, I was going to say Maximums, the excellent point. And interestingly, you can see in the Palestine Laboratory by Anthony Lowenstein, which I've done a review for on this channel, there have been ties, ever strengthening ties between Israel and India, particularly under the Modi government. And so they find themselves very simpatico. Also because of the Muslim connection, right? This Hindu nationalist idea in India is, well, Israel's doing it, and who's going to attack Israel? And India is also strong within its own right, and it's a rising country. So who is going to take them to task? Strangely enough, the whole reason this crisis is happening with Pakistan, and you can't make it up, they're short on ammunition because they were pressured by the US to send their supplies to Ukraine. So the Pakistanis only, I think, have 4 or 5 days of ammunition, which is why they don't want to get into a war with the Indians. The Indians know this. They feel strong. They feel like they can do what they want. They're part of BRICS at the moment, and they're leveraging that as well. They know that Russia is focused on its own things and that China is not likely to come in on the side of Pakistan, nor is the United States, especially not under Trump, who couldn't find Pakistan on a map if he tried. So I think your point's very well taken, and it shows the implications of what happens of when Israel acts with impunity. But unfortunately, that doesn't matter. Israel will be allowed to do what it does indefinitely because the US plans to support them indefinitely. You have a Zionist president, or at least a supporter of Zionism. Do not be fooled by any sort of comments about there being a rift between him and Netanyahu. Trump changes by the day, by the hour. Whatever Trump thinks is the product of the last person he speaks to who has any intelligence and confidence. That's how Trump is. One day he's telling everybody that Gaza is going to be evacuated and ethnically cleansed, and the other day he'll say, "Oh, I don't know who said that. Not me. I don't know who said the Gazans were going to be evacuated." So, unfortunately, you're right. India is being emboldened, but that process has been going on for a while. If you want to learn more about that, check out the Palestine Laboratory. If you don't have time to read the book, check out my review. I've done 2 reviews on that book, actually. All right. Any other questions in the chat? Any other reflections on the documentary? Anything else that you want to talk about before we wrap up today's stream? I think it's well worth watching, and perhaps not a great introduction to the settlements, because Louis Theroux effectively starts in medias res. He assumes you know that the settlements exist, and he assumes that you know that they are all throughout the West Bank. Very revealingly, he has Daniela Weiss show a map, and you can see all these red dots all over the West Bank, and even in Gaza. These are either settlements that exist or settlements that she has planned, because there's no settlements in Gaza at the moment. That's why she has it marked. So Sobe, one day they're eating the cats, and the next day Gaza is a beachfront resort. I mean, as I said, what can you do? I mean, President Trump is President Trump. That's just how he is. It reminds me of the nasty crusaders in the Middle Ages. Their arrogance was their undoing. Maximums, I fear that you might not actually know too much about the crusade. Most of them were not nasty crusaders, and the reality is that they had a pretty enlightened rule. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem didn't bar Judaism. It didn't bar Islam. Muslims and Jews were allowed to continue to exist during the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. It wasn't a very long-lived period. Were there some bad actors? 100%. Just like they were bad acting Muslims and bad acting Jews. But to characterize the Crusaders as nasty means that you haven't studied the Crusades enough. And I have done a review on my Stephen Heiner channel on a very short introduction to the Crusades, but it points to all different things that you can read about. But in general, I don't think the Crusades can be characterized as nasty. I think that's historically inaccurate. All right. Any other thoughts, questions? As I said, shameless plug, if you want to learn more about the American Indians and U.S. policy towards them, check out my Stephen Heiner channel in about 25 minutes. We'll be doing a long stream with a gentleman named Dustin Neely. And I'm really looking forward to talking with him and learning with him and his audience about this book. It was a lengthy book. How long? About 500 pages with endnotes. Ambition Bird. Muslims were allowed to live and worship in the Crusader states. Yes, that's true. Muslims and Christians were allowed to live and practice in Israel. Okay, but that's, I don't know, Ambition, I'm not entirely certain what the argument is here. I wouldn't say that the Crusader states were like Israel. Israel is a Zionist ethno-nationalist project. The Crusader states were not were not an ethno-nationalist project. Um, None of the Crusader kings visited Europe the entire time that the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem um, existed. To say that they're pretty similar, it, it's ahistorical. It either means you don't know about Israel or you don't know about the Crusader states, which is fine. I don't expect the casual YouTube watcher to know a lot about the Crusader states. I do expect them to know a little bit more about the state of Israel, but unless you know what you're talking about, to say they're pretty similar, it's just not true. Um, Henry Langstaff, why are you? I don't. Is that a philosophical question, Henry? Soprano Mezzo. Israel is a colonial, fascist, supremacist, radical Jewish regime. Soprano, I think you could probably drop 3 or 4 adjectives from there, and it would still. I think just to be clear, it's an ethno-religious regime. Doesn't matter what the form of government is, but they want more land and fewer Arabs. That's the heart of what Israel is. What I meant with the Crusaders is that if Israel doesn't integrate, sooner or later that will be their undoing. When you say doesn't integrate, what do you mean by that, Maximums? And realistically, you're speaking as if there are possibilities for Israel, but Israel is only headed down one path, led by people like Ben Gavir. Keep in mind, Ben Gavir is officially in the government, and he's a settler. So the settlements have moved from the fringes of Israeli society in 1967 to the mainstream. They're now represented in the government. If they don't integrate in the region to be accepted by their neighbors. Yeah, but I don't see that happening, Maximums. I only see more militancy from them, at least in this most recent period of violence. That could change 100%. It could change, but it just seems unlikely, especially given all the escalation that has happened recently, especially with Netanyahu. Could things change with Netanyahu's removal? Sure, but I think it's wrong to look to that as a solve, because who is waiting in the wings? You have people like Smotrich and Ben Gavir, people who are more militant. You have to realize that I said this on my live stream on the Sky News profile of Netanyahu. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description and a card later after the live stream. Netanyahu is a moderate. He is a moderate in Israeli politics. There are people who are criticizing him for not going hard enough in Gaza. I want you to think through that. If Netanyahu is a moderate, what do you think is waiting when Netanyahu goes from the scene? So be careful what you wish for. And I'm not saying Netanyahu has been wonderful for the Palestinians, but I'm saying that removing him is not necessarily the solution. Israel has to be forced to deal with the consequences of their actions, and the world has not displayed any sort of willpower to do that. I don't see that coming anytime soon. It doesn't even come from the closest neighbors, the people like Egypt, countries like Jordan. What could turn the tide? Maybe Saudi Arabia. We have President Trump going there soon. Could something change it? As always, anything is possible, but it seems unlikely to me. The Saudis have never particularly cared for the Palestinians, and I don't see them risking anything for the Palestinians. If there's a good deal for them to be had and they could do something for the Palestinians, maybe they would. But especially with MBS, who's a very pragmatic person, he like Trump doesn't have any deeply held moral beliefs. I don't see him doing something for the Palestinians unless there's a way it can tie into benefiting him directly. Ping, only 3% of Israelis disagree with the genocide of Palestinians. That number seems extreme, Ping, but I wouldn't be that surprised if you could cite the source for that. I'd be interested to know. I'm not doubting that it's possible, but I think maybe something like 15%, 20% would disagree. 80%, the overwhelming majority of Israeli society agrees, but 3%, that's pretty dramatic. Netanyahu may do a U-turn. He is no hardcore. Okay, but the problem is if he does, he's going to be brought to trial. He has 3 different court cases against him right now. So if he steps down, he's just going to go to jail. So for him, this is the best possible road. Go out as a hero. There could be a peaceful integration of settlers into a Palestinian state. Of course, they are violent now, but they won't always have an army behind them. Yes, Henry, that's possible. The problem is that will their theological belief allow that? Because if God is on their side, how could he allow the Palestinians to triumph? That's effectively what a Palestinian state would mean. God has failed them. And then they will say, well, we have to do right by God. We have to fight for our land. So I don't know that they have the theological equipment to accept that. Whereas, let's say in South Africa, there wasn't a theological argument being made. There was a supremacist argument being made. There was an economic argument being made, but there wasn't a religious argument being made. Here, it's religion, and people can do irrational things on behalf of religion. All right. Any other points, questions, comments in the chat before we wrap up today? Thank you for the lively debate and points that were being raised. I would only encourage people, do not buy whatever the mainstream media has told you about the Crusades. Actually go and do some reading and research yourself, and that'll allow you to understand that the Crusader states and Israel don't have anything to do with each other than there were foreigners coming to a land. But the families from Europe who came to run the Crusader states, they stayed. They wanted to become part. They intermarried. They took up the ways of the land. So it wasn't a question of trying to create a colonial project there. So I think it's tenuous to try to link the two. The Crusades were not a colonial project at all. But that's probably a discussion for another time. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the stream today. As always, I try to do these streams once a week, looking at different documentaries. If you're interested in seeing a documentary covered, I have a long list, but I'm always learning from you all. So if you're seeing the stream afterwards, please put in the comments either links to or titles to different documentaries you'd like to see covered. I did one not so long ago on my neighborhood, which was sent by one of you all, which led me to reading the book written by the boy who was only 12 years old at the time of the documentary, but now is in his early 20s and is an activist, Mohammed Al-Kurd. And so those sorts of things happen because you all share things. So please feel free to share that in the comments and let me know what I should cover next. Last comment, MBS invests in Jared Kushner's property business, stealing more of the West Bank. Yeah, Ping, no surprise there, right? All right, thank you all, and we'll see you on the next stream.